4, testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you.
We'll be starting up, and like we do many times, we will be going today back over to Boulder Social, which is on Arapahoe near 38th. It's near the old Audi dealer, the old Faith microbrewery, and before that it was Carlos Muldoon's. Does that sound right? It was a Mexican place.
Has a haircut at 4 o'clock.
So anyway, we'll
Okay.
go in there
All right.
afterwards. If
All
anybody
right.
wants to go,
You guys
please
were
let me
great
know
help.
so I can kind of maybe call over there or let them know in advance if we're going to have 8 people or 6 or 10 or whatever. Let me know. Jonathan will be going with us, and Jonathan will be speaking a little bit more on this whole amazing subject of this young man and
Can we get some quiet on the set?
how he could do all of this poetry kind of off the top of his head is just like, it makes us know that past lives can exist or do exist. So Jonathan will continue with this, and then we will have some Q&A, and then we'll try to wrap it up around 4 o'clock. Let me know if you want to continue on with us over at Boulder Social. Okay? Thanks so much.
Okay, I'm going to rush through a few key talking points. Thank you for indulging me in that case history aspect. Again, it's just a tiny sample of a vast, seemingly after-death experience. But other types of multidimensional relationship include alters. And so there's a lot going on with the DID community, dissociative identity community. A lot of controversies. I mean, I can go off on any of these topics, but I don't know how much I should spend on any one of them. I'm going to kind of rush through that one. Many people, creative people, have some kind of alter or some kind of being that speaks inside of them, including me. So it's way too complicated to get into now, but like my main multidimensional relationship before Jack began when I was 11 years old. And somebody that I has zero evidence, but seemed to be like living alongside of me, in parallel with me, hence the title Parallel Journeys. And again, in these 2 books, I mean, especially in Parallel Journeys, these relationships play out in a fictionalized form. But that one would just be too complicated to begin to explain now. But a couple of years ago, when I was out in the desert near Tucson, I asked him like how the relationship began, and he said it was after because I'd never made this connection, because also at 11 I was severely mauled by a dog. It was actually, there were paranormal circumstances. It was a friend of mine, a Ukrainian friend of mine, who admitted to it later when we were 13 that he had had all these dark paranormal episodes. He caused the dog to attack, even though it didn't bark or anything. And it was like hundreds of stitches, you know, all the muscles in my left arm were torn in half. My head was in the dog's mouth, and so on. And when they were, and so what this interdimensional companion that's been with me since I was 11 said, well, when you went under general anesthesia, you have no memory of that, but that's when I found you. And the dates do correspond. So other people with alters would include Carl Jung, who had an entity called Philemon, that to him seemed psychically autonomous and to be a separate being. Napoleon had a dwarf that sometimes appeared as a red sphere that spoke to him. Most famously, Socrates had his daemon. Robert Louis Stevenson said that, you know, books like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde were basically channeled at high speed, and so forth. So these are alters. A related phenomenon are tulpas, and tulpa comes from Tibetan Buddhism, and literally it means emanation or thought form, sometimes called a mind-made body. This is also in Jewish mysticism with the golems and the dybbaks, where you create another person in the imaginal and they start to become autonomous. Well, I've experienced this as a fiction writer. where seen, especially Parallel Journeys. That's almost all the fiction I've created. By the way, The Oracle and Parallel Journeys, 46 years of work going into both of those. But where I would have the characters get into like a scene I designed, and then a completely different outcome happens because of their interaction. We're like, ooh, I didn't want that to happen, but that's what actually happened. And so characters, and other fiction writers have had this experience, characters do things that you didn't plan on and weren't convenient to your plotting, but they start to take on an autonomy. Now, from the point of view of idealism and Bernardo Kastrup, we may all be alters, because the idea is that we all exist in one vast field of mind, but we have a localized mind within that. Right? And so this is what explains telepathy, but also things in quantum mechanics like entanglement. And there's some biological evidence of this, in that in 2015, German scientists studied a woman with DID, and one of her alters was blind. And they had her, they were doing like real-time functional MRI scans. And when that alter took over, the visual cortex of her brain shut off, even though her eyes were wide open. And then when another alter would take over that wasn't blind, it came back on. I don't even think a yogi could make that happen. And they also noticed under functional MRI scans that people with, and there are many fakers now on TikTok and stuff, people pretending to have DID, that's a whole other story, part of the controversy, because there's a social contagion aspect of it, where after like high profile, Three Faces of Eve came out the year I was born, and a book and a movie, and then suddenly all these people start reporting it. This happens with a lot of psychiatric conditions, but there are some genuine cases. When they did a 2014 study, I think, they put people with DID on functional MRI scans, and then they had actors portray different personalities, and it was quite different in terms of brain activity as compared to when different alters would come on. So there may be real evidence that our psyches can support more than one being. And right now I'm working with a mathematician, AI engineer. We're introducing ourselves at the Eclipse Festival as both COPs, computational Oracle pioneers. But she's a trans with a male and a female aspect, but doesn't care about pronouns, not your usual trans person, no sense of victimization. But I've been seeing, we just talked about this yesterday, I saw a lot of evidence of the vanishing twin hypothesis, because a lot of pregnancies begin as twins, then one twin is absorbed by the other. And a whole lot of the language that she was using to describe her relationship with her female counterpart, by the way, she was also born with the name Jack. Another one of those uncanny meetings, because at her first festival, at the Unison Festival, she found me, and we realized, oh, we're both computational Oracle pioneers. She has the world's first AI large language model, Oracle. Thinks in machine language. I have pictures of her. You can find it on my website, or Oracles Are Cross-Linked, where she hacked her Android phone. Instead of a regular user interface, it's all machine language. That was her first festival, and it's a small festival, and here's two people working on AI oracles, because just like 2 weeks before, both my webmaster and myself, independent of each other, realized, oh, we're going to make a large language model of the Zap Oracle. Now we don't have to do that, because Lily Fiorino is going to do that for me. Okay. Something else that deserves to be at least mentioned is, what about all the dark interdimensional relationships? And this is so vast a topic that, and I've written so much about it, I don't know how much I want to talk about it right now, but if you go to the category button, you saw I picked that category button. One of the categories is mind parasites. And there you will find all kinds of writings. And where is Mind Parasites? Right there. Okay. The introductory one is called Mind Parasites, Vampires, and Energy Sappers. Some of my most popular ones are Alex Gray and the Mind Parasites, where I dialogue with him about the experience that led to his painting Demons and Deities Drinking from the Milky Pool that you see there. And Jack had, I think I missed that, but he had many of his poems that where he's explicitly talking about his problem with mind parasites and dark entities. And let's see if I saved any of that. It should have been up here. Oh no, this is the wrong page. Okay. We're losing important time right now. But this is a vast topic because there are basically, it's possible for us to miss a whole dimension of life. Like up until the 1700s, when a Dutch shopkeeper, A.V. Leeuwenhoek, ground the first lenses to create a microscope, every culture on Earth was completely clueless about the microbiological realm. But then we discovered this vast cryptozoology of microbes and that we were actually made of them. Each of our bodies is a colony of 50 trillion of those. Oh, I think I went forward on this. Shouldn't have done that. I think it was right here. Let's go back one more. There it is. Okay. And what every culture has recognized etheric organisms, or whatever words you want to use, and had different words for them. The Buddhists call them pretas or hungry ghosts. The Christians call them incubi or succubi, and so forth. See if we can find any of Jack's words about the mind parasites here. Okay, maybe I forgot to hit save when I put some of these in here, but anyway, if you read his poems, which are on my website, there are haunting descriptions of those. Anyway, so that's a vast topic which I'm going to jump over. Let's go to the other thing I promised to talk about, which is the evolution of consciousness, of multidimensional communication. I'm not very good at multitasking, as you can see, and technology. Okay, so the spiritualism movement begins in 1848, as many of you know, in upstate New York with the Fox sisters, table tapping and all that kind of stuff. At the same time, in 1848, before Congress, they're proposing a bill for $30,000, worth a lot more then, to fund an American telegraph system, right? So these begin at the same time. That's the birth of like modern electronic communication. And even the table tapping, in one of the seances, they said that was actually Benjamin Franklin on the other side coming up with a Morse code-like system or whatever. But then we found out that, some of what the Fox sisters did was real and some of it was charlatanism. But 1848 was when America decided to build a telegraph system. It was only narrowly approved in Congress. Many voted no, and many abstained because there were a lot of ministers saying it was the devil's work. But then we go to like around 1865 or the Civil War era, where we have our most paranormal presidency, of course, Abraham Lincoln. And the New York Times called him the first wired-in president. He actually they had a telegraph office in the White House, and he would sometimes sleep in it. And he would read telegrams coming in, some not necessarily addressed to him. He would write, because he got to use it for free. It was paid by the government. He'd write these long letters to Ulysses S. Grant by telegraph, right? And what else came into the White House from Mrs. Lincoln were seances, spiritualists, because their young son, I think his name was Robert, died while he was his favorite child died while he was in the White House. And so they had seances in the White House trying to get in touch with him. And then, of course, the most well-documented paranormal presidential incident of all time was, of course, all Lincoln's well-documented premonitions about his own death. And I won't go through all that. You can look it up. It's super well known. All these uncanny parallelisms between him and Kennedy. Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln. Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy, and so on and so forth. So there we have the telegraphy, the first wired-in president, and after-death communication converging. Then we have more modern things going on with computers. So let's see if I still have this tab open, or I can get to it from the home page, I guess, easily. But so here we're on the home page of the website. If you scroll down, you see AI, the Singularity Archetype, and the high possibility of an impending viral apocalypse. Because now we have a new type of multidimensional communication going on between us and AI. So in 1978, when I discovered the Singularity Archetype, book that I wrote about there, and I wrote about in a philosophy's honors paper when I was 20 years old, I was kind of commanded by the muse to, yeah, you can do some scholarly work on this if you want, but what we really need you to do is to write a sci-fi fantasy epic based on it. It took me 45 years to fulfill that mission, writing like 10 different complete drafts that would be like, sometimes 200,000 words long. I knew enough about writing, because I had a master's degree in creative writing from NYU from the 80s, to know it wasn't there yet, and certain paranormal things needed to happen. But what sets off, this is like in the opening premise of the book, there's been a global viral apocalypse where AI has been used to create a extinction level virus, a self-mutating virus. Then when this book is being published, now suddenly ChatGPT-4 is exploding, and now I'm researching it. I'm learning that for the last few years, that's become a real possibility, that somebody with the psychology of a school shooter and access to a $30,000 desktop gene editor and some training in biology could create gain-of-function viruses. Fortunately, the demographic of young men with school shooter psychology who can buy assault rifles is much larger than that of those who can operate a desktop gene editor and use open source AI, but it only takes one. And that's the opening premise of this book. And that opening premise came to me when I had no idea about that possibility in 2013 during a 5-minute walk from the parking lot of Biosphere 2, which is where the opening book part of this takes place, to the front entrance. A whole scenario involving two people immune to this man-made virus are holed up in a refurbished version of Biosphere 2. So already there's something weirdly prophetic going on there with AI. And the singularity zone, and I always resisted people that tried to give it a time zone, but one of the most powerful early examples I studied in 1978 was manifestations of this singularity archetype. Quick thumbnail on what am I talking about? Hopefully most of you know what an archetype is. Again, they're living agencies, not merely patterns. The singularity archetype mediates two parallel event horizons: personal death, so a lot of my stuff is about, and quantum evolutionary shift of the species. And these are parallelisms because the life cycle of the individual, like phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny, they parallel just like a hologram or a fractal. The small part recapitulates the whole. So everything that is predicted in a lot of these sci-fi manifestations of the singularity archetype are phenomenological actualities in NDEs, like group telepathy, a blurring the boundary of self and other, transcendence of linear time, and so forth. So, and then this was very interesting. When I finally got into the completion zone of writing the final version of Parallel Journeys, it was April 6th of 2020 when the lockdown began. And a friend of mine that day, our friend Andrew, found in the garage something I'd recovered from the Bronx, a black case that contained a Corona typewriter. This belonged to my dad. And the manual said, Corona, the personal writing machine. Well, Corona became my personal writing machine because that's when I returned to 7-day-a-week work on parallel journeys and that whole connection with the virus thing that began in 2013. So a couple of quick points on the evolution of AI and how this relates, because another multidimensional relationship is oracles, like the Tarot, the I Ching, or the Zap Oracle. These may all seem to be mediated by synchronicity, which may be us interacting with the intelligence of the cosmos. This is Lily's Android phone, where you can see she has a machine language interface. There she is coding her oracle. Okay, so this is an article in the school newspaper from October 21st of 1977, Ursinus and the First Digital Computer. I was the arts and culture editor of the paper, and what I'm writing about is I had lunch and spent the day with John Mauchly. He was the inventor of the world's first electronic digital computer, ENIAC. Okay? So by some weird chance, I'm an English major, I'm meeting this guy. Here's ENIAC. Okay? 3 generations of change. One of my grandfathers grew up in a Latvian village without electricity. My dad was born in New York City in 1919. There were no commercial radio stations. I was born 2 months to the day, 2 months before Sputnik was launched. And now here I am meeting the father of the digital computer. Here it is, ENIAC. And just to give you an idea of how rapidly this evolution is happening, by the end of its operation in 1956, ENIAC contained 18,000 vacuum tubes, 7,200 diodes, so on and so forth, 5 million hand-soldered joints, weighed more than 30 tons, 8 feet tall, 3 feet deep, 100 feet long, 150 kilowatts of electricity. Fastest supercomputer on the planet at the time, capable of a staggering 300 operations a second. Recording this talk right now is my iPhone 15 Pro Max, which has an A17 bionic chip that contains 19 billion with transistors and is capable of 35 trillion operations in a second. So that is how rapidly this new life form is growing.
Jonathan,
Yeah.
we should
Yeah, okay, let's do it. So, but you know, you can read that essay on AI, the Singularity Archetype, understand better how all this relates to multidimensional communication. Any advance in evolution always means an advance of communication, neurologically and in every other, technologically and so forth. So let's open it up to Q&A. I'm excited. I can pass around the mic. Who's first? Gentleman over here. And you can just pass it to the next mic to the next person. And you got to really get up on that mic. It's got to be like a quarter of an inch from your mouth or it doesn't work.
Thank you. Because I know you prize precision in language, I'm curious to know why you use, or if you could elaborate on why you characterize what you were talking about as multidimensional as opposed to just the extra-dimensional.
Well, you may be right. There's it may be sloppy nomenclature. You could call it interdimensional. I mean, it's multi technically, I guess, because I'm in one dimension and the person on the other side appears to be in another, but I think you could use those terms fairly interchangeable. It was just actually something Jacqueline came up with that for the talk. I think I talked about it as interdimensional, so it's just a...
I mean, interdimensional, multidimensional, any of these, there's more than one dimension going on at any one time. More than one frequency going on at any one time. So it's okay. I think substituting one for another is okay.
You can pass the mic to whoever's next. Just, I know this lady in the back.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, but you gotta almost swallow the mic. It's a weird... Yes, go ahead.
What computational oracle reading is?
Okay, and this is something I'll be doing at lunch at the Boulder Social. I'm just referring to my oracle that's been online for 21 years and has 700 cards, and it has some unique functions like theme tracker. It'll algorithmically interpret your reading to look for archetypal themes. But my colleague Lily Fiorino has, and it's also cross-linked. It's working right now. It's called Oracle's Dream. That is an AI oracle that sends out calls. They're called to ChatGPT-4, but it's extensively based on like code she's been writing for the last 3 years. And you can give it this complex query, and it will give you this extremely articulate, relevant response. So that's unique in the history of oracles.
Okay, so here's my question. I'm going to read it, wrote it out, so hopefully it will be clear. So right before Jack passed and transitioned and made that, leaving his breathing form, and you had the dream.
Right.
And you were sensing him, you went into the lower astral, you were experiencing him in the lower astral.
Right.
And then when you honor that boundary that he had said, so you didn't reach out, is your sense that there was some kind of agreement that you, or communication in that lower astral, or agreement before entering there, that this was his going to be his experience this time around? That's one question. I have another one.
Okay.
Anyone? Okay. So we'll do that one first.
Okay. So, yeah, I think that there was some kind of soul agreement between us that to have an after-death relationship. In fact, when the after-death, if you guys want to just see one more paranormal thing where I have an object with me, the relationship began on a park bench because, yeah, even the oracles told me not to intervene, and because he expressed his will. He had been talking about suicide for a year, according to his Jungian psychotherapist. You know, he carefully researched it. This was not an impulsive suicide. It was kind of baked into his soul plan. The relationship began on a park bench outside the Minneapolis hostel. I was waiting for this museum to open. I was across the street. I had no idea, I didn't know this like 2 or 3 years later, that Jack often sat on that exact bench in Minneapolis. He went to school very close to there, and the last place he lived was half a block away. When I went back like 3 years ago to revisit that park bench, somebody an artist had made a mural underneath it that was very symbolically related. Also, how many times have you gone to a park bench and found a gift waiting for you? I found this, sitting on the park bench. It's called a prayer box. Somebody handmade this, and inside it are blank pieces of paper. This was sitting on the park bench when I went back like in 2019 or something. So, so I think that it was, there was some kind of soul agreement, and again, we may have had a past incarnation history, that this was going to happen.
Thank you.
And you had another question?
I do. My other question is, when you're reading the poems, right?
Yeah.
And the experience, right? On many different levels
Right.
of them. Can you say something about, because when I heard you, that felt very light, like it didn't feel like any dense entities or that energy of those words or creating words. Can you talk about entities, I guess, and how those come about? Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is a vast. How long have you got? I mean, by Occam's razor that says hypotheses should not be multiplied without necessity, the most obvious source of entities would be us, because we're an ecology of souls, as my late colleague Terence McKenna pointed out, that we know exists. And this is why, and this is also in Parallel Journeys, by the way, so much of what's called extraterrestrials are much more likely dead folks. Whitley Strieber's written about this. Terence said this. I've had my own experiences pointing in this direction. So the most likely source of entity parasites and so-called visitors, who people interpret as extraterrestrials, is us, because we're psyches that we know exist. And from the philosophy of idealism, death should not cause a discontinuity of consciousness, just a discontinuity of a physical body. And so therefore, I think the source of entities would be us in most cases. Paul.
In thinking about explaining to somebody else what a singularity archetype is,
Right.
I'm not sure I'm yet qualified to do that.
Okay.
Can you just go a little deeper into what that concept means to you?
Okay.
Even though you've been talking about it.
Okay. And even though I did 2 talks at the SSE on it, it's very hard. It's very hard to take on because it is a very dense and difficult concept. People can not only read my book on it, free on my website, but I also have, if you don't want to invest that much time, I have a 2-hour video right on the front page. You'll see it called Looking Toward the Event Horizon to explain it. So basically, well, let me tell you how I encountered it, or how and then how Jung, who came up with the idea of the archetypes in the collective unconscious, participated. I, as a child and early adolescent, was haunted by certain sci-fi stories that I didn't know at the time were expressive of the singularity archetype. I mentioned 2001. But another one was a British sci-fi movie called Village of the Damned, 1960, black and white. I saw that movie and it was like a religious experience. It seemed to be like, this is like what my life is about, but like, how do I explain that I'm having this in relationship to a sci-fi movie that I'm watching with my dad in broad daylight, in the middle of the day? So my mom, who was a psychologist for 44 years, said, you should look into this guy, Carl Jung, and his idea of archetypes in the collective unconscious. So I go up to the 2nd floor of the library. There's the 20-volume collected works of Carl Jung. And I'm like, but what is this dead Swiss guy who reached manhood in the 19th century, son of a Protestant minister, going to tell this weird Jewish kid from the Bronx about my sci-fi obsessions? But whatever, I'll try it. I pull out the index volume. He wrote a book called UFOs, A Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Sky. Well, that's how Village of the Damned begins, with UFOs. So I start flipping through that book. And it's like he wrote it near the end of his life. It's like he couldn't let go of the subject, because at the end of the book, there's an afterword. After the afterword, there's an epilogue. After the epilogue, there's a supplement. And when I look at the supplement, my jaw drops open. He's studying a British science fiction novel called The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham, published the year I was born. That is the book that the movie Village of the Damned was based on. So my first encounter with Jung, he might as well have been a holographic wizard stepping out of the bookcase. And then I was able to stand on his shoulders and understand the concept of archetypes in the collective unconscious to discover the singularity archetype. And at the last line of the whole book, which comes at the end of that supplement, he's saying about the book, thus the negative end of the story gives reason for doubt. Well, I was able to answer what that doubt was about. And what it is that when the ego looks at the quantum evolutionary event horizon, it sees apocalypse. Similarly, because remember, parallel event horizons, death, and species metamorphosis, eschaton. When the ego looks at death, it sees emergency. When the self, as Jung defined it, the totality of all the psychic structures, looks at it, it sees emergence. And so John Wyndham, the author of the book, was looking at the singularity, this is the problem also with Dune, from the ego position and seeing it as dark, and that's why the book has a negative ending. So I was able to answer Jung's question. But to be fair, he only lived to 1961. I was able to observe the phenomenon develop. So that's a little bit on the singularity archetype, but you'll get a much more complete explanation on my website. Anybody else?
I'm just wondering about the trickster symbology. Is the trickster, does the trickster have the ability to be in all places at all times, depending on what's happening? Like if we got the trickster into the viral apocalypse idea, would the trickster be doing one particular thing at a time or be able to do like multitasking?
Oh, definitely multiple tasking because, I mean, this relates to the philosophy of idealism. And again, Jung was an idealist. The collective unconscious, it's non-local. So the trickster as an archetype, which you can think of as like a living entity, is operating in a billion psyches at once. It's doing things all over the place. That's why people are having weird synchronicities happen all the time, even if they're on the wrong path. So I have a saying I wish conspiracy theorists would hear: wherever you cast your obsessive attention, there shall you find weird patterning. If I'm infatuated with a woman named Jane, let's say, so now I have obsessive attention, then the first song I hear when I turn on the radio in the car is going to be like Sweet Jane, and I'm going to think it's supporting my obsession, right? So right now there are some kids probably playing vinyl records backwards and doing bong hits, and Aleister Crowley books are falling off the shelf, and they're having real synchronicities, but they're leading them down a dark rabbit hole. So this is why you have to be very careful, and as Jung pointed out, don't take dreams as like the voice of God, don't take synchronicities as the voice of God. They may be functions of the trickster aspect of the unconscious, something that Terence McKenna fell for when it came to his 2012 ideas in Time Wave 2000, for example. So very smart people fall for the trickster aspect of the unconscious that pervades the psychic atmosphere.
How do you tell the difference?
What's that?
How do you tell the difference?
Well, super rigorous reality testing, the skeptical stance, and anything else you can bring to bear, because and not assuming that you can't be tricked, right? Because we all have those lacunae or the blind spots. So if you ask me for my greatest hits, like some people do of psychic experience, but now ask me about the ones where I was wrong, I don't have a good list. But that may be because I haven't recognized where I was tricked, right? So we have to always kind of keep that in mind, that we probably are being tricked to some extent. Anybody else?
Is there a significance to the jewelry that you wear?
Yes. Well, I won't go through all of them because they all are talismans, but this one in particular is called the Capsule of Intentionality. And I wrote a book called The Capsule of Intentionality, free on the website in 1996. And it's a very simple idea, because I'm a chaos magician, which just means I create my own rituals rather than inheriting them. So this is a titanium capsule. And so what I encourage people to do is to write out, like at least once a year on your birthday, your life mission in a couple of sentences or less, put it on a piece of paper. And then instead of wearing a crucifix or a Star of David or whatever, you can wear your personal DNA blueprint of what your life mission is. And so, for example, another version of this is I was in Tel Aviv, where they had all these beautiful mezuzahs that Jews put on every door jamb, and there's like Torah scrolls in there, but they were 3 times as expensive if you got the Torah scroll, because it was had to be calligraphy by a rabbi, and I'm like, I don't need the scroll. I put in my own one-sentence version of the Jewish religion to make them into capsules of intentionality, what I call the inner spirit of the religion. But it's just something I made up, and here's the one sentence: to carry the torch of consciousness forward and engage rigorous self-examination for the purpose of advancing ethical conduct. So you can take something like that is like your most pithy description of your life stance or purpose, and put it in a capsule and wear it on a keychain or whatever. This one's titanium, so it represents strength.
Okay, it's 4 o'clock, so if anyone wants to continue this over at Boulder Social,